Here at SNR, we broadcast from the Lifelock studios.
It's a pack of dogs chasing a piece of meat, man.
We hit the road for the Lifelock 400.
Rowdy.
And we get rowdy. It's Hour 2 of Rowdy Racing, a special edition of Sporting News Radio, bringing you the guys from Rowdy.com, Buck Fever, and Bassmasters, direct to your radio.
Girls in race suits are sexy. That's all I can say.
Rowdy.
And in a pit.
Brian likes to fish. I like to fish. You know, we both raise baby deer.
From the Michigan International Speedway for this weekend's Lifelock 400. Rowdy Racing is on the air. Now, back to the Lifelock studios in the pits, surrounded by checkered flags. Once again, here's Buck Fever and Bassmasters. It's Rowdy Racing.
Well, I guess that would make us Buck Fever and Bassmasters, or in my case, Bassmasters, in your case, Buck Fever. And we're here on Rowdy Racing, of course, in the Lifelock studios, Sporting News Radio. It doesn't get any better than this, Buck. Well, maybe a little better. We're getting a back rub right now.
Yeah, or
that would make it a little bit
massage
better.
would be sweet.
That'd be good. So people wanted to know, how did you come up with these names? Because, you know, let's face it, Buck Fever and Bassmasters, I mean, you got to know right away those are made up, right?
It's a long story, but
actually, my name is Leonard Masters.
Leonard Bassmasters and Reginald Buck Fever. Essentially, the way this works is it involves three things: a 7-Eleven, a beer run, and Blaze Orange. And so I was at a 7-Eleven and I saw a Buck Fever hat and put it on, and 3 beers later I was Buck Fever. You hand Bass 2 more beers and he became Bassmasters. And so essentially this is the story of how Buck and Bass became good little buddies.
Yeah, and then we started our Rowdy Racing podcast, and you can catch that on iTunes or at rowdy.com. And now we're on the radio here, Sporting News Radio, thanks to the folks at Lifelock. I like to say they made 2 good decisions, sponsoring the Lifelock 400 and sponsoring us, Buck. And, you know, on the poll for the Lifelock 400, Brian Vickers, and I believe he won the pole the last race here at Michigan. It's a good racetrack for him. Interesting thing on this starting grid. Let's just go over it real quick before we talk to Brian. I'm going to get some words from him in just a second. But
who's this guy in second?
Kyle Busch, the guitar smasher, is in second. Jimmy Johnson will start at the inside of row 2 there next to David Rudiman. Good run for David. I mean, here's a surprising driver. We talked before a little bit about guys who maybe weren't doing as well this year, and I still haven't got into my Dale Earnhardt Jr. theory, but maybe we'll get time for that later. Kurt Busch, A.J. Allmendinger, that's row 3. Juan Palamontoya, Casey Kane, Clint Boyer, John Andretti, Tony Stewart, Kevin Harvick, Robbie Gordon,
look
Denny
at that.
Hamlin. Okay, now here we're at row 8. Okay, now what are you noticing at position 15 on the starting grid? Bill Elliott in the 21 car.
Race fans, here's the interesting thing. You look at all these guys up front, and you're like, wow, that's great. Robbie Gordon got in there. A.J. Allmendinger, wow, great run. John Andretti, no way.
Yeah, way.
And you're thinking it's the greatest thing since, well, sliced bread. But you notice that there's no Fords in there
and
at all.
And the first Ford is Bill Elliott.
Yeah.
In the Wood Brothers car.
And what car tends to win at this track? I mean,
we know this is a Ford track.
Absolutely.
We know this is a Roush track, Roush Fenway track. Okay, so Matt Kenseth, the top Roush car, I'd say that's a great sign for him. He qualified 16th on the starting grid. You know, we talked to Drew Blickensderfer, his crew chief, yesterday. It's very interesting what he said, because he was comparing Matt to David Reagan. We were talking about long runs at Michigan. There's a lot of green flag racing here. We know that. Matt Kenseth is very, very good here. We know that. So we said, how is it to tune your car for the long run? He said, yeah, basically, Matt was driving with Reagan, and Reagan passed him, and Matt said, yep, David's too fast. And you say to yourself, well, wait, this is racing. Can you be too fast? The answer is you can be too fast early in a run, because if you're good now, you're going to be loose, you're going to be tight, or whatever the handling condition is later. And sure enough, in a few laps later, Matt was back by the 6 car.
You know who was really fast here yesterday? Our good buddy Brian Vickers.
Brian Vickers was looking very good. And
very much so.
I think we predicted it. We finally caught up with him.
We chased him down.
Well, here's what happened. We got to tell this story.
It's a classic story.
We can tell it briefly. We're waiting for Brian to come up and sit down with us here and have a little sit-down conversation. But security wouldn't let him up.
Race fans, the security guards wouldn't let the race car driver in to hang out with Buck and Bass.
I'm all for security,
but it's a little crazy.
But anyway, we did track Vickers down.
We did catch up with Brian Vickers, and he has gotten the pole here 2 years in a row. And the question really is how can this be such a great track for you, BV?
That's a great question. If I could figure out why it is, I would start applying it to every other racetrack on the circuit. I've always enjoyed here. It's a fun, fast racetrack. It's difficult to drive, difficult to get a hold of because the pavement's so wore out and the cars slide around so much. we've just been able to nail it. I mean, the car's unloaded both years, and it's been great.
How do you take one fast lap here? Obviously, a lot of green flag racing at Michigan. How do you turn that into a good long-run race car?
That's another great question. It's not an easy one to answer. I mean, I tell you, last year we had a great race car. The past couple of years we've had great race cars. Hopefully we can turn that speed into a long-run car again. And I really believe that we can. It doesn't mean that we're going to win, though. It takes a lot more than that. I mean, last year we had the fastest car just about the whole race, and at the very end of the race, some pit strategies, some different things came into play, and we were going to be third on the restart, and then NASCAR decided they wanted to put us in fifth, and that cost us the race and gave Dale Jr. the win, and they came back and said, oh, whoops, that was we messed up, but that didn't do us any good at that point.
Yeah, I remember that. Now, one more question. I'll give it back to you, Buck, but talk about just the process of finding the right line here. Are you trying to get the car to work on the bottom or the top? Or are you just searching around, or what's that process like?
I think you really want to try to run it everywhere in practice. Mm-hmm. Personally, I like it to be able to know that I can run up top. I'll sacrifice the bottom for that, but I prefer to have a good car in both. I mean, that's not easy to do, but it is possible. It's good to be able to run the top and the bottom, maybe at different points in the run. Maybe you start on the bottom and you work your way to the top, but I don't want to have to be committed to either one.
All right. Now we're hitting with a weird question.
Yeah, we hit you with 2 weird questions, or probably 3 if I can get them off. The Art of Happiness, your favorite book. You live in New York City. What does it say about our sport when you got a driver who's reading The Art of Happiness and living in New York City?
Well, I live in Florida. I live in Palm Beach, but I love New York, and I visit there some. That's saying the sport's changing. That's for sure. And listen, I mean, I'm from North Carolina, from the South, and I love it. And I spent a lot of time in Florida, and but I didn't grow up in the generation where you have to. You're from North Carolina, you have to be from there, and that's it. Like, I mean, I traveled a lot. I want to travel. I want to experience new places, new people. See new cultures, and whether it's in New York where you can experience every culture in the world, or whether it's traveling the world or traveling across the U.S., I think that myself, I'm a very open-minded person, and I think the sport's growing that direction. We have drivers from all over the states, a lot of international drivers as well now coming in the sport. The sport's changing.
All right, we had a guest recently on the Rowdy.com podcast. Greg Fernelli from Stock Car Steel.
Yeah, I know. You read it.
So here's the question. In one word, or if you can only do one word, describe Greg Fernelli.
Wow. Well, I guess I could use wow. I could use nuts, crazy, awesome. One of the coolest guys I know. He's a great guy. I tell you, his story, not a lot of people know it. He knows how precious life really is, because some of the things he's had to go through in his life. I don't want to spill all of his personal secrets, but I tell you, and it's amazing being around someone like that, especially him, because he lives life to the fullest, and you got to appreciate that.
Yes, he does. Brian, thank you very much for joining us on Rowdy.
All right, that was Brian Vickers right here on Rowdy Racing, live on Sporting News Radio here at the Lifelock Studios for the Lifelock 400. And I got to say, you brought up Greg Fernelli. Not a lot of people know who this is, not a lot of race fans, but he is the guy whose company provides the steel and aluminum to most of these race teams. I think he said 95% of the steel and aluminum to 100% of the race teams, and it's kind of an interesting story.
It's an amazing story. You can go to Rowdy.com and see the video on Greg Fernelli. Greg Fernelli was going through a wicked bout of cancer. I don't know, you would call it death's door, but it wasn't good. And he decided he would come up with a company, Stock Car Steel, and Stock Car Steel provides a majority of the steel to all the stock car racing teams, a very high-quality product, and it's kind of interesting how he got in that business. Most steel companies want to sell the teams massive amounts of the same kind of steel in big quantities, and he kind of reverses it and sells them little different pieces and very high quality.
They got a lot of specialized needs, right? So for a big company, it doesn't really work so good, but for a little specialized company like Greg's, it works great.
We bring up Greg Fernelli, we bring up Stock Car Steel, because if you're going to listen to Rowdy.com's podcast, you're going to get to know some of the people in racing that you have no idea who they are. Sure, there's the Jeff Gordon, sure, there's the Dale Juniors, and there's the Brian Vickers, but there's a lot of little people behind the scenes that make it happen, and that's sort of what we are at Rowdy.com.
Now, you mentioned Dale Jr., and he is a guy that, I think most race fans probably know who he is. And this race okay, is a real cleavage point to me.
Cleavage?
Cleavage from between last year and this year, okay? Last year, remember, Dale Jr. came in third in the points. He left third in the points, and he won this race. Yes. And he was having a great year. He was probably the best Hendrick Motorsports car at that time.
He looked like he was going to do very, very well.
And he made the chase. But I think what's a little deceptive about that is after this race last year, the only top 5s, or the only top 10s rather, that Dale Jr. was able to get were on either short tracks, plate tracks, or tracks that are essentially big short tracks. And by those I mean Phoenix and New Hampshire.
Right.
No top 10s at a downforce racetrack like this one. Okay, and I think that's where the slide first started, and we got to ask the question, well, why has Dale Jr. had so much trouble? And I think
the answer basically, it's really interesting. It's communication.
I think so too.
It's the ability of the crew chief, in this case his cousin, to communicate with him. And you think about it, you should be able to communicate very easily. You should be very professional. But when you're family members, sometimes your pride gets in the way. And Dale Jr. has admitted that more than once, that I would just tell him the car's not working. Sorry, it sucks. It's too loose.
Well, the other thing is, think about this car for a second. This thing is much more tightly controlled by NASCAR. All the drivers are going to tell you these cars are much closer in speed. They're out there practicing behind us right now, getting ready for the Lifelock 400.
Ladies and gentlemen, and get ready for Bass. He has three things.
I don't have enough time to really lay out the theory, but all I'm talking about is this: precision. The driver is the data acquisition system for the race car during race weekend, Buck.
There it is.
You know I'm right.
There it is.
So the better the data the driver is able to communicate to the crew chief, and mind you, that's not all on the driver. The crew chief has to be able to hear what the driver is saying and interpret that. But that's where the communication between those two guys comes in. I think that's more important now, the precision of that communication, exactly what the car is doing, where on the racetrack it's doing it. That is critical with this race car. And I think maybe that has put a burden on Dale Jr. and the Tony Jr. thing that they just weren't able to meet. Well, and hopefully he'll be able to meet it with Lance McGrew.
Yeah, their relationship got in the way of actually being professional.
All right, now speaking of professional, we're going to talk to a legend when we get back. Here on Sporting News Radio, Rowdy Racing, Bobby Allison. We got to meet Richard Petty. Now we get to meet Bobby Allison.
Next, Drew Pearson.
We're going to talk to him when we get back. Sporting News Radio, Lifelock 400, Rowdy Racing. We'll be back after this.